I met Freddie in the mid-80s. I was working at the time for Dave Clark on a show called Time, which is a musical in the West End. We were making the album, and Dave Clark thought 2 or 3 of the tracks on the album were ideal for Freddie. And as a logical continuation of the work I'd done on the album, Dave suggested the idea that Freddie and I might work together. Freddie, I seem to remember at the time, I think was making the Mr. Bad Guy album in Munich. He certainly was resident in Munich. And we met at Abbey Road Studios for the first time. And really that was the start of a long-term relationship. We worked together from then on until Freddie died.
It was a Queen album called The Game, and I just had word. I was working with Gary Moore at the time in Los Angeles, and I had word that I was supposed to come to Munich and work on the album. So nobody seemed to know anything specific, so I figured I'd hop on a plane, come to Munich, and then I turned up in the studio, and a couple of minutes later Fred turned up and said, introduced himself, I introduced myself, and he said, "What are you doing here?" And I said, "I'm supposed to do this." And he said, "No, not that I know of, but if you're here, great, let's get going." And then we started doing a crazy little thing called Love.
The first time I worked with him, actually, was for A Kind of Magic, and it was Roger's song, but Roger went away for 2 weeks to Los Angeles, and Fred said, "I want to have a look at this song of Roger's. I think it's got potential, but I don't like the way it is at the moment. I'm going to totally change it and rearrange it." Okay, fine. So we spent 2 weeks together in the studio, and it was the second day in, I think, and he was running up and down the studio full of ideas. And he said, "I really want to do this now." Okay, great. But I had to change the tapes for him to be able to do this. And I made the mistake of not doing running commentary of what I was doing. I just kept quiet and started changing tapes. And he was pacing up and down with this idea that he desperately wanted to get out. And he turned to me, "What on earth is going on? I'm waiting all this time." And I should have said, "Look, I'm changing the tapes, I'm doing this." And he got quite impatient with me for a moment, because he was so fast, he just wanted everything to happen as fast as it could.
The first time I remember hearing Freddie Mercury, I was actually driving through, I was driving up Primrose Hill, and Kenny Everett on Capital Radio then said, "Listen to this record, it's the best thing I've ever heard," and it was Killer Queen. And it was an extraordinary record, it's still an extraordinary record. And I thought, well, this is, you know, the band, of course, had been around before then, but maybe not so much in the public persona. I just thought this was the most fantastic record, and he was the most amazing performer. And as the band became more and more visible in the media, well, not just me, but everybody began to be aware of what an extraordinary performer this chap was. On every level. I mean, he was an incredible singer, absolutely amazing singer. I still struggle to find anybody that competes with Fred as a singer. And certainly, as a rock and roll performer, I think anybody that's got a commanding stage presence has pinched something from Fred at one time or another. That goes from, you know, artists like Prince and you name it. They've all, in fact, they've admitted so much as well. So yeah, I was a big fan of the group and Freddie. Yes. From the first moment I became aware of them.
All I knew was stories and video clips, and I was actually quite scared, because you just knew he was outrageous, and you expected I expected the worst, and there he was, and as gentle and helpful and just wonderful. He was extremely shy. And first meetings would always be, to anybody, terrible, and he would never be the first one to actually break the ice unless he really knew that he had to work with these people, and then he would just make a step forward and say, right, this is the way I want it and this is the way I do it.
I don't think people at large realise how insecure people in Freddie's situation often are. As we all do, Freddie had huge insecurities and even worried about his own ability. Now, that may surprise many people when you look at how confident and how wonderful a performer he was. But he had those insecurities, as we all do. He worried about his appearance, he worried about his voice, he worried about his writing. It didn't stop him from exploring all those things. It didn't stop him from writing or performing, or it didn't stop him from appearing in public, so stating the obvious, really. But I don't think people realise to what extent he did worry about these things.
He was a very gentle, sensitive man, really, in private life, definitely. I mean, not at all the flamboyant extrovert that we see on the videos and on the stage. He would always remember people's birthdays, for instance. I mean, anyone around him, he knew their birthdays and there would be a present. He was so generous and very thoughtful.
He was a very funny man, immensely entertaining, had a wicked sense of humour. But there again, it was only one of those things you got when you knew him. If you didn't know, if there were people around you didn't know, he was actually a painfully shy man. When he relaxed with friends, he was immensely entertaining, very funny.
Freddie was, I think, very much into creating a mystique about him and not being too accessible by the media, and just being that outrageous guy, who I was a little bit worried about to start with, and being at home, watching TV, and just making sure the Christmas tree is decorated properly, and having like a really nice household together. I think that was the other person, which very few people knew.
The short answer to did Freddie care about the press was yes, you care, because they can be quite horribly vindictive and wounding and grossly inaccurate. And Freddie, more than most, suffered from people who really had I don't know how to put this really. Well, they just tell lies. People that really had no business even talking about him. If someone he didn't respect criticised his work, he would go, well, you know, what do they know?
The weakness probably was the insecurity he sort of had, as any creative artist has, because you question yourself, is this really good, or is this just crap, or and the nagging doubt that everybody around who supports you sort of pats you on the back just to be on the payroll and says, great man, you're doing really good. And I think therefore we had a pretty good relationship, because I never bought into that kind of stuff.
With regard to working with Montserrat, for example, he worried that people would misinterpret things, that maybe imagine that he was trying to be something he wasn't, maybe worried that his voice wasn't good enough to be on a par with her. I mean, he'd have massive insecurities, as we all do, if we're really honest. And I think, as often happens with people that are as highly profiled as Freddie, it's sometimes a surprise to people that they are normal human beings, and perhaps with many more insecurities and worries than most people. He worried about his friends and his family, and he was desperately keen to take care of everybody that he thought relied upon him.
He was thinking about doing solo things for the longest time, possibly all the way through his career. But I think he was quite scared. He wanted to do things like with Tina Turner, but whenever it got close, he always backed out and probably felt he wasn't good enough, or had just doubts about working in an environment outside the band. And I'm not quite sure how this happened, but maybe simply because he was here in Munich, I was here, and I just said, let's get going, and then he just jumped over his shadow and we started doing it. Working on a solo project, for instance, in Munich, I would pick him up at around 2 at his apartment, take him to the studio, had breakfast, then we probably played Scrabble or Trivial Pursuit, and maybe around 5 o'clock we felt all bad enough and compelled to actually do something. So either that happened or we just had to wait till it was 7 and to go out for dinner. On other days we actually got a lot of work done in probably half the time it would have taken laboring over it the day before. He was absolutely genius. I mean, I told him that many times, you're a genius, and he said, "Nah, I just do it." And really, it usually took him maybe 15-20 minutes to come up with something absolutely brilliant. The actual execution of doing something, seeing it through to the end, that was a little harder for him, because once he had the idea, it was basically finished for him.
But always the strongest idea won. I mean, if it was really strong, then it was fought hard for, and the strongest idea would win, yes. But Fred was very much the director, I think, in some ways, especially when it came to the final touching up of songs and stuff. He had a fantastic knack, a fantastic ear for how a finished record should sound. And I learnt a lot, well, really a lot, from him through mixing with him, final records.
Fred's description were to the extent that a heavy sound like a shopping mall dropping to the ground or mountains crumbling, sort of fairly extreme comparisons to what he actually wanted.
And sometimes it's pretty hard to keep up with all the ideas that keep coming out. I mean, especially from Freddie. I remember one day we were working on A Kind of Magic, and he said, I want to hear a herd of wildebeests swinging from left to right. I said, oh yeah, fine, how am I going to do this? And I spent another 2 days thinking about it. Realizing what he wanted some kind of effect, stereo effects. And so eventually we came up with these magic effects that were swinging around. But he would, in 1 hour, come up with 3 days' work, really, in ideas. And then the job was to put it all down.
There wasn't all that much of a concept in I want to be different or do something outside. It's just he liked danceable stuff very much, and black music, danceable black music, and he just combined that and did what he thought was right for him at the time.
Fred's great joy was just being able to express himself without really having to worry about an audience or anything like that. Or other people around. So he'd launch himself into these absolutely fantastic flights of fancy sometimes. And sometimes he would go out to sing a vocal, not really having written anything as a starting point. He would just go and sort of sing anything. And we'd pick it up and go, wow, that's sort of okay, let's work on that bit.
Freddie wrote most of the things in the studio. At times he was toying with ideas, but he tended to make things up on the spot, or if it was extremely brilliant, he made believe that he just made it up, but he worked it out before. Fred didn't really wanted nobody else around while he was singing, but at the same time he was literally attacking the microphone just to get what he wanted, or running up to the mic to hit certain high notes.
He was quite a diva, yes. Don't play across my vocal there, I'm singing. Wait till I stop.
On the way to meeting Freddie for the first time, the day before, I think it was on a Monday we did the session, excuse me, on the Sunday prior to that, I'd had a car crash, a head-on collision with a truck, and I was in some discomfort. I'd broken 4 ribs and also slightly sprained both wrists, which was not really great for a piano player. And on the first session, of course, I said to Dave Clark, whatever you do, don't mention anything to Freddie. I don't want him to think I'm complaining about anything. And we started to record this track, in my defence. And it was just piano, bass and drums and Freddie. And we were getting, you know, more and more intense about this, and Freddie was going, yeah, this is great, I love all this. You know, harder, faster, play some more twiddly bits, get faster, bit flasher there and whatever. And I had got what I thought was the definitive performance as far as I was concerned anyway. And we went to listen to it back, and Freddie said, oh, that's wonderful. It's ever so nearly there. And I said, my God, you mean ever so nearly there? He said, yeah, but I think you could do a little bit more at the end so it's a bit more exciting or whatever. And at that point, Dave Clark said, well, Fred, you know, he said, he did have a car crash yesterday and he's in some degree of discomfort. And Fred said, oh, we'll find it. I said to Phoebe, give him some vodka and give him some pills, make him feel better. We'll go and do it again, it'll be fine. So we had to go out and do the whole thing again.
Freddie was an absolute non-technical person. I mean, I think at times he was still amazed when he heard what he actually did came out of the speakers again. I mean, this is making it a bit too easy, but still. Technical things he wasn't interested in, and I mean, he tried to explain, but usually just left it to me to find a way to do it. And I think that's was for a good working relationship, because we never really had to discuss in length or at length how to do it.
With Freddie, there was never a rehearsal in the studio. It was always the full type of thing. In fact, sometimes he used to make such a racket it was unusable, you know, knocking things over and whatever.
I remember a really late night jam upstairs, because the studio's upstairs, on the piano, and Freddie singing and improvising with so many ideas. It was great. And at one point I remember Mike actually stopped playing because he was so tired, and Freddie had all the energy and kept going. And there was a few words spoken, like, oh, keep going, keep going, keep going, and everything. And we've got that on tape, which is rare, because normally he didn't like a tape running while he was doing ideas. He didn't. He thought people shouldn't hear anything until it was finally finished.
Possibly the most impatient person to convey a thought onto tape, because as soon as this happened in his brain, it would be nice if it was actually finished and was in the charts.
Freddie was a great one for testing you. In other words, you had to work damn hard when Fred was about, and there was none of this, oh, that'll do business, which is not my way anyway, but you know, the two of us were such sort of perfectionists in the studio. It's a wonder we ever got anything done, to be perfectly honest. But it was a great experience, and I remember many times in the studio that you know, for example, Fred would go out and sing after I'd finished my bit, and I'd be sitting there. He would say, well, what do you think of that? And I said, well, it's okay, apart from it. And he would I remember on one occasion he turned around and said, for God's sake, he said, you're worse than I am.
We were a really good match, because I could, after a while, sort of pick up what he was thinking, and we were thinking along the same lines pretty much, and I managed on a few things to become faster than he thought. So the working relationship was, I mean, and the personal one was extremely good.
He could go crazy. He could actually ask people to do impossible things, or things that he could conceive of but maybe could not quite execute. And one of his favourite things, you know, he would just say, "Oh, come on, dear, you can do far better than that. Go faster, louder, crazier, you know, whatever." All these ideas. You know, I want you to do it even more than that, or when you played something really well, and he said, no, I think you can do it even more. There was this constant quest for, you know, even more extravagant things, or even more interpretive things, or more dynamics, or whatever.
I mean, when you've got a lot of things on your mind, so to speak, you can get lost a bit sometimes, and he was always very good at making things very clear as to how they should be, and how other people would like to hear it.
Freddie never played safe artistically. He was always willing to explore that bit further beyond it. I mean, he would never be dictated to by what people thought, for example, ought to be commercial, or that's the right, you can't do this, you can't do that. Fred never played. He's a very courageous man artistically, and I think that's the most significant thing I learned off him. Don't be scared of pushing yourself beyond what you think you can do and what other people expect you to do. Just try anything you like. If you feel it's the right thing to do, then do it. That's how I remember Fred, a courageous artist. Yeah.
Oh, definitely a perfectionist, yeah, everything, and every single note had to be examined in minute detail. And he was very much in control and in charge of every single note as well. I can remember with Mike, who's the most fantastic musician, him actually all the time over Mike saying, I want it to sound like this, I want you to play more like this. And it was a difficult job for Mike to do as well, I think.
But it was hard work, yes. But it taught me that you never give up. You always keep going and you fine-tune a thing until it's right. You don't just say, oh, well, that's what we can do and here it is. You don't stop until it's right.
We went to all the important functions, Christmas, birthdays, and we became very close on a social level. And it was a wonderful experience. That house at Garden Lodge was an absolute delight to be in, full of wonderful things and done with impeccable taste. And it was also a home. It was a place that wasn't precious either. Fabulous array of friends. We had hysterically funny times. Wonderful sing-songs around the piano with, you name it, they were there. But sometimes just Fred, Peter Straker and myself, hours on end.
He really tried to be the perfect host, and Freddie was really sort of funny in trying to lay the table, bring on drinks, and he really tried his very, very best to be a good housewife.
He was an immensely kind, thoughtful, generous, sweet individual. Very amusing. He was the most incredibly funny man. And very loyal to his friends. He was incredibly nervous about meeting her in the first instance, but Fred had such wonderful presence that, of course, as soon as he met her and got over the original, my God, it's this diva I've loved for many years, he then became very animated and really wanted to know all the details about her life and these great performances that he had on video and all these, great recorded performances he had of her. And within 10 or 15 minutes of them being introduced, they were best friends. It was an extraordinary lunch, and he was in awe of her. It's not in awe; is perhaps the wrong word. He had an immense respect for her, and she was one of his favourite performers. So the actual meeting in Barcelona took the edge off when we worked together. But it's still the first time you work with someone like that, and I suppose conversely the same goes for her working with him. It's a totally alien thing for her to do. She'd never done it before, and I think one has to remember that this was before the three tenors had, sort of come forth. It was really before people had gotten the idea of mixing, rock stars and opera singers perhaps becoming crossover successes in the commercial market.
He was going to do some music with an opera diva. I mean, he loved opera music, we all know that. From Bohemian Rhapsody, for instance, all those opera influences. And he was just beside himself with happiness that this was all going to happen. And everything had to be perfect. And there were flowers put in the control room for her arrival. I remember him insisting that the studio there in London redecorate the ladies' bathroom, just in case she might use it. Everything was put in place. He always thought of all those details for people to make them comfortable.
I remember when we when we first did Barcelona, and before he and Montserrat had really performed together, this was in Ibiza at the Coup Club, and Montserrat had arrived, and he said to me, well, maybe I shouldn't, she's a well-respected diva, and she's perhaps not used to my cavorting around the way I do. He said, maybe I should sort of tone it down a little bit. I said, well, it's your show, Fred, you do what you like. And of course, what he'd forgotten was that here was this diva that came on, has done all these powerful operatic roles. Of course, she came on like the battleship Potemkin, and he ran over to me and he said, she's outdo me, watch this. Boom, and off he went back again. And that was the start of this chemistry. But he was quite taken aback. I just remember him waltzing up to the piano. He said, wow, she's outdoing me. This is not on at all. And this amazing chemistry then started to take hold, and off they went. I remember, obviously, Freddie the performer. Freddie the private man, I remember on wonderful one-to-ones when he confided some very private things, which are not to be repeated, and he was just a very generous, lovely man. That's all I can say. I think that's it.
Well, he was very much into creating an image and keeping up an image for the outside world. But at the same time, he wanted a private life and look after his vases and cats, and that he simply couldn't do in London, and obviously not in New York. There's too many bars there. I think that chose Munich because a lot of bands at that time came through Munich, such as Deep Purple, Uriah Heep, what else? T-Rex, and so I guess it was something like word of mouth too. Say like a neutral ground, which has a different language. He was able to go into shops. He could go just in the supermarket and just wander around and do things by himself without having press or just people breathing down his neck. He could go to the beer gardens and just more or less behave like a regular person, which he very much was when he was off stage. And I took him down to the English Garden, where they have the big beers, and he just sort of walked, and he had like a fairly outrageous outfit for that time, like Hawaiian shirt, flowery shorts, and a bunch of people, and and I pretty much knew everybody there, so it was like kind of unusual, but he was so charismatic, and just didn't care about anything. So I figured, what should I care? And that made for a good start. He was very much outgoing here, and as I said before, he didn't have anything to lose, and he just could talk to people in the bar where nobody would really be very much interested in, are you a singer? And that would be always like second or third stage. But first it was just having a good time and dancing and whatnot.
The Barcelona album and subsequent things were not the end of the story. Yes, but I guess we would have carried on with his solo album, which was interrupted, fortunately, I suppose, by this collaboration with Montserrat. Yeah, we would have carried on. We would have carried on, on a different tack. Yes, yeah. There were many things we talked about, which perhaps would have come to fruition. Yeah.
Intent wasn't really, at least in the later days, to work all day and all night. It was more do a little bit of work, do that concentrated and quick, and then go out and have a good time for a long time.
I remember one thing which sort of in some way sums up Fred's approach to life. We were around there working in the afternoon, and also there was an event in the evening which just encompassed the usual suspects: myself, my wife Linda, Peter Straker, a few other friends. just the same people that had been round maybe 2 weeks prior to that. And I was just leaving to go home and change, and Fred was fussing around, getting everything right, flowers, the right tableware, everything right. And I said, Fred, and he made some radical change in the flower arrangement. I can't quite remember exactly what it was, but I said, Fred, calm down, relax a bit. It's only us, And he said, my dear, he said, that's absolutely the whole point. In other words, his friends were the most important people in the world, and that's why he made the effort. And it's a great object lesson to anybody. It doesn't, you make more effort for those people you care about than you do for anybody else, and that was perhaps Freddie in a nutshell. Yeah.
It did change my life that I actually realized there's not that many really, really good people around, and that I had to be really grateful for actually having the opportunities for a number of years to work with him, and not to slave away over a hot Mexican console and trying to make people who aren't really all that good into something what the record company thought they should be.
Well, as far as I'm concerned, I think for the entire time we've worked together or were together, everything what needed to be said was said. But after he was ill, it was just extremely difficult to actually get through to him. I mean, telephone-wise, or I even went round to his house, and he was out to see his mother, and I tried there, and I probably didn't try hard enough. I should have tried harder. This is the only thing I'm not really too happy about myself.
He was like one of the really brilliant rock and rollers of the time, or of all times really. Not many people who can sort of live up to that.
There's some days I can be mixing in here on someone else's music, which I do these days, and I'll suddenly hear him in the back of my mind saying to me, make that louder, make it more obvious, in the way that he would have said it to me when I was mixing for him. And I find it quite uncanny. He's still there, and I really appreciate that. I think it's great, and I miss him a lot.
I've been very fortunate in my life to have been involved with some of the bigger rock bands, played stadium rock, jazz, popular music as a studio musician. I think, for my money, Freddie Mercury is perhaps the finest interpreter of a song I've ever worked with. So I've never seen anybody that gave so much to a performance. It was the most extraordinary person to watch. Extraordinary emotion when you're on stage with him. I mean, this is an artist who gave absolutely everything in every performance. Never half measures. So I put Fred right up there with the very best of all time.
I miss him so much, Amazing, you don't realise how much people influence your life until they're not there anymore. And so it's like rehearsing. When Roger called me up and said, look, would you like to play? I said, I'd be thrilled to do so, And he said, well, can you play this song, this song, this song? Okay. So the tapes out, and which I haven't done since Fred died. And, it was a terribly painful experience to do that. I've thought about him so much more, I'm ashamed to say, since he's died than when he was alive. Every day, I think. A great loss, really.